So, as I said, I'd like to present a Thiruvalluvar bridge in India. This is our client, Michael Jacob, who is an official with the state government in Tamil Nadu, who contacted us about 12 months ago, based on some of our cultural and infrastructure projects we've done both in New Zealand and also Asia, and asked us to look at this project. And so the project is located at the very southern tip of India in the state of Tamil Nadu, which borders Kerala, and it's just across from Sri Lanka. So if we go a little closer in, you see there's the town of Kanyakumari, and the project actually is the linking of the mainland to the two islands that are just off the coast. So there's two little islands there that are the sort of the sites of some quite significant cultural and religious objects, and they're about a half a kilometre out to sea. And so the project was very simple. It's just to connect a bridge to the two islands, and that are currently served by ferries that take visitors and pilgrims out to the islands. And in the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, some of that infrastructure was damaged, and so as part of this project, it's sort of a renewal of that infrastructure. So this is the photograph we took on our first site visit. This is on the mainland, looking out into the Indian Ocean, looking to the east. And so on the right-hand side, you see Thiruvalluvar, which is the statue. It's sort of roughly similar size to the Statue of Liberty in New York. And the island just behind that on the left-hand side is Vivekananda, and that's a temple. So Thiruvalluvar was a 16th century Tamil poet and philosopher, famous for writing on morals and ethics. Vivekananda was a 19th century Hindu revivalist and Indian nationalist. So again, looking at the site plan, you've got, just to say, you've got the Vivekananda Islands on the right-hand side, you've got Thiruvalluvar in the centre and the mainland on the left-hand side there. So one of the first things we did is really just to look at the alignment of how we could connect from the mainland to the two islands. We knew that we had to connect to the existing docks that were on the islands, so we couldn't really vary the points at which we landed on the islands, but we had some flexibility on the mainland in terms of where we landed. That was all public land, and we could determine on the mainland where we launched from. So the first alignment there is really just the shortest possible route, so it's roughly 400 metres and roughly 100 metres. The second alignment we looked at was just a straight line further south, looking right through, but again landing on similar points. And then the third alignment we looked at, well, not really the third, we looked at a lot of alignments, but the third alignment I'm showing you today is a small kind of curved and sinuous alignment, which has some important reasons to be, which I'll touch on a little later on. So the brief of the project was really, again, to design those bridges. They had to be concrete, they had to be robust. They were very conscious of the tsunami that had come through, so the bridge had to resist hydrostatic forces. It had to be covered. Because it's so long, it's 500 metres, they wanted a shade device so that the temperature in the sun, there was an ability to kind of shade visitors as they walked out. And they wanted something which would be a real kind of what they felt was something which was very a statement in its own right, something kind of large. They wanted some sort of verticality to it. They wanted either a cable stay bridge or a suspension bridge. They even suggested something like the London Eye as a sort of tourist thing that could be on the bridge. But we felt that it was important that the bridge really resonate with both the statue and the temple, and that it have a connection to it materially and sort of in formal terms. And really, it could be sculptural, it could be elegant, it could be timeless, but it shouldn't dominate. It really is not the point. The point is the statue, and the point is the temple. The point is not the bridge. It's really just connecting to get there. So we really felt it shouldn't dominate. The Lotus is obviously a very potent symbol in both Indian politics and religion, and we were sort of a bit wary of that. But it is a nice metaphor for renewal and regrowth. It also just has a really beautiful form in the petals. But we were quite drawn to the geometry and mathematics that's evident in some Hindu art. It's highly mathematical. It's also biomorphic, draws from nature, and quite repetitive in terms of its formal language as well. This is an Indian mandala. It's a sort of polar array, so we were quite drawn to that and thought of that as an idea. So we sort of began the project really by thinking not about the bridge as a whole thing, but maybe just a component of the bridge, or the DNA, I guess, of a piece of the bridge. And this is a sort of an early sketch, so it's really just a module here, and that was just two parts really. One very kind of simple deck, which landed on one point, which then hits the seabed, and then one petal, which also comes down and hits that same point. So very quickly, if we just sort of step through the geometry of how we formed it, this is an axonometric view, sort of a line diagram. Mainland's on the left, the Thiruvalluvar Island, and then Vivekananda in the background there. So we knew we wanted this sort of sinuous curve, and we knew we had to be quite strict with the geometry of that because we want to be modular. Modular also relates to kind of constructability and efficiency of materials. And we're really interested in the chord length. So we drew these two circles together, and we wanted those two circles to meet tangentially, and that point of inflection to be on the dock of the first island, so it curves and bends from the first island to the second island. So we drew these two circles, and we were really interested in getting the chord lengths highly modular. So the chord length is obviously the arc described by the radius. The radius is really a resultant, it's not mathematical or a pure number. So we've got on the larger arc there, we have 400 meters, and we have 20 modules, of 20 meters. And on the smaller, we have 5 modules of 20 meters. And then we divided that up, and then we began with the geometry. So there's a petal, and I'll go into the geometry of that petal in just a minute. So we designed this kind of petal that would be a shading device, and then arrayed that through that larger arc. And then we did sort of a concave arc, and we did the same for the other one, which is the smaller bridge, but it's convex, so it's a slightly different module. And then we arrayed that to produce the second bridge. The decks follow on from that. And then if we put that in context, again, there's the mainland, 2 islands. And we'll talk about the geometry of the actual module. So this is an elevation of the back of one module. So it's slightly in perspective mode, so it's not a straight elevation, but it's 20 meters on the front leading edge. And you see the deck there is very straightforward, very simple. It comes down and lands on one point. That point then sits on a pile which goes into the seabed. The petal above, again, lands and comes into that same point, so it all springs from one point. Just very quickly, this is the rebar we put through with our structural engineer. This is there's post-tensioning tendons that have to go through. So the tendons on the deck are longitudinal. The tendons that run through the petals are transverse, and they are there to counter the huge cantilever on that petal. There's the kind of composite of that. So if we look at that in axonometric view, you've got the petal there, you've got the deck below that. Again, all in concrete. There's the rebar and the tendons there. So those tendons are pulling on those petals, and then pulling on the force back into the base, and then through the piles into the seabed. And there's the composite of those. So if you look at the beginning of that, and you look at the module of that, you've got the petal above there, and you've got the deck, and they're obviously exploded for that view. And you begin to array that, and you sort of find yourself, it's that repetition we really liked, and that sort of modularity we really liked. And it had that reference back to the mandala of the kind of repetitive nature of the geometry. The two modules, so on the left-hand side, that's the convex module. These are actually slightly exaggerated. The difference between them is actually very, very slight because the radiuses are so large. The convex on the left-hand side, you can see it's just got a slightly curved outer edge, and the module on the right-hand side is a kind of concave edge. So once you understand the geometry of these, then of those two modules, you build the entire bridge. So you've only really got to work out two modules, and then everything else is an array of that. So then we begin to see some views. There's a view from our model looking at on the deck. And then the first rendering we did really just showed sort of the curve. And the curve I touched on earlier was really important because we felt, because we had to have a cover on this, if we had a straight alignment, you wouldn't be able to have a view of the object that you're moving toward. So by curving it, you can always see the statue, you always see the temple, and that's really important to understand the legibility, to have legibility of where you're heading to. The petals that cover give it that protection from the sun, and also provide views both ways as well, so you can look to the south and obviously to the north. And we saw that as being sort of a materiality that was sort of resonant with the statues, very heavy, very solid. If we could have formed this out of rammed earth, we might have, but this is concrete, but it actually can be quite rough. And then the next mode we looked at was the dusk mode. So it really becomes a different object in some ways. It becomes sort of a light sculpture almost in that regard. So very clearly a different mode there. And I'll just kind of I'll just show you a little video of that, and it just really tracks from the dusk through to evening, and you sort of understand the kind of the two modes of the bridge. So here, it's getting a little darker, but the materiality is kind of what the daytime mode is about. The sort of simple sculptural quality, the light and dark of that, the shading of that, the syncopation of the petals as you walk toward the statue, and as it becomes darker, the lighting which is just sort of between the deck and the petals, just begins to kind of come up, and so we use the petals as light sculptures, and they then reflect the light down to the deck and put that onto the walking surface, and they provide kind of a lighting element and again a light sculpture in their own right, and because the statue is uplit, they sort of resonate with that as well. And that's the project.
Great, thank you. Another very seductive and compelling presentation. I think it's a great idea, and I think it does all the kind of things that you wanted to do to kind of defer to the things that you're moving toward and not making too much of a statement in its own right. I just wanted to ask, I suppose it's the same question about, it's going to be public, I assume?
Yes.
Free to use, anyone could use it?
Yes.
Yes, so there's no... so you have a very pristine rendering of, it's looking very crisp but again, India, I mean, people will be setting up stalls, and I mean, would you envisage it, people kind of setting up stalls and people sitting and, inhabiting it kind of as people walk past, because it's the tourists and... Sure. Yeah, so that there's kind of, but there doesn't seem to be any, there's nowhere to sit when you're kind of walking across it, I take it.
Yeah, I think in all honesty, I don't think we'd considered stalls and markets being set up on it. That's just our first thought. I guess we've rendered it here in a way just to kind of emphasise the sculptural quality and the poetic nature of that. So we haven't rendered all those other things. I mean, I guess one comment I would say though is we don't imagine this being pristine and crisp. This concrete is not kind of a shiny, clean, crisp concrete. We want this to actually be quite sort of rough. I think the words timeless and scaleless are quite important. I mean, if this looked like it'd been there for, say, 100 years already, we'd be quite happy with that effect. It can actually be quite rough, as long as the sort of the geometry of the deck and the petals is significant, and then you get the light, the shade, and the kind of that nature. I think that's what we'd be happy with. I don't think we're after kind of a pristine look to it, although the rendering might be a bit barren.
But you'd be happy for it to be sort of colonised, I assume.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, several thousand people a day cross this, or
so
take ferries out to the island, so it won't be just two kids.
The loneliest kids in India. Right. Christine.
Thank you very much. It's a very elegant scheme, and I was at first sort of wondering, why you did a curve in order to link the two islands together. But of course, I mean, it's now absolutely apparent that the principal thing is to still maintain the views of both objects, which I think is absolutely sort of critical. I suppose my question is more to do with the sea and to do with the sort of ecosystem of the sea. I mean, it's a very big object, and it what is going to happen? What sort of disruption is there going to be to the ecosystem along that sort of coastal edge? Because if you look at the development of coastal edges, I mean, anywhere, whether it's Northern Europe or Southeast Asia, any form of intervention has actually done things like alter wave patterns, alter current patterns, and therefore, as a result of that, alters I suppose both the biodiversity but the ecosystem that already exists. So I just wonder what your response was to that.
Yeah, I can't honestly answer that in terms of knowing about the ecosystem impact on this project, what the project would cause yet. I mean, this is a reasonably early stage of the project. I could answer by saying that we know the seabed's actually very shallow. It's rock underneath, so if it was sand, we'd actually have to put a lot more piers down to the ground. So we're putting one pier every 20 metres. So we've got one pier every 20 metres going into the seabed. And the only real parameters in terms of that was the length of span. We tried to maximise, so we minimised how many piers were in the seabed. and then the difference or the delta between high tide and low tide in terms of the clearance that we had to have between the underside of the curved decks. But I don't think I can answer your question yet. We haven't studied those things yet.
Karen?
How wide is that?
That's 7 metres, and then it's a total of 9 metres, and it's each side is about a metre in terms of the barrier depth. On the left-hand side, there's actually kind of if I cut a cross-section through there, it'd be a triangle on the left-hand side for that barrier. And on the right-hand side, that's just an inclined wall at the back, but all formed from the concrete, so a total of 9, but clear of 7.
So can cars and bicycles and motorbikes go on it?
Cars are not intended to go on it. At one end, they would be kind of a barrier at one end, but I think bicycles, people would happily go on it.
Another question is just how does it touch the land, and what is the resolution where it touches in the beginning and when it gets to the 2 islands?
Yeah. The 2 islands is a little easy to answer because we've thought about that more. Where it hits the land, there will actually be some sort of centre that it will result in, and I don't have an image of that. I can't show you that, unfortunately. These are the only 2 images that we have of the project. For the land side, it would be kind of an object that would be sort of relatable or resonate with the petals that we already have. So some sort of starting point which actually looks like a cousin of one of those petals. I can't point, but you can see there at the base of the statue, there's a petal missing. So where we have the connection to the statue, we actually take one petal out, and that the deck curves seamlessly through. And we remove one petal, and that's the clear entry point into the statue, into the Thiruvalluvar statue. And then when we hit the second island, the deck just runs into the dock. But I don't have a digital model, so I could show you that, but I don't have renderings of that, sorry.
Paul?
Well, you've given a profoundly eloquent description of a very elegant scheme, and it all falls into place and has a kind of logic that leads one to say, well, how else would you do it? And that's often the example of a very good piece of work, and I think everybody in this room will appreciate the subtlety and the sensitivity of it all. But I think many people in the room will be asking why, and is this better, is this temple better, and are the islands better for having been linked, for having broken the geographic separateness, which is a cultural separateness as well. And think of Mont Saint-Michel in Normandy, think of the whole specialness of Ireland. And to break that, there has to be profound gain. And one of the gains, of course, is the movement and the easy movement. I get that. But I go straight back to Catherine's question, which is about the programme and what's happening. And a little to Christine's, I start to feel about the views down and into the water. I'm not talking about through it. I'm talking about just being able to sit and look down. It will be inhabited, that bridge. There's no question about it. So I just really invite you to talk to us just a little bit about how that inhabitation might be programmed.
Okay, I'll sort of have to make it up on the spot, I suppose. I think if we were to design habitation or inhabitation onto the bridge, seating areas and those sorts of things, I would imagine they would be out of the same sculpted language of the deck itself, so it actually might morph and form seats and benches and that sorts of things. We've done a similar project in Auckland, a cycleway through the middle of the city where we did something similar to that. The deck actually morphed up and became seating and so on. And we are, though, hovering above the water here, so there's no connection really down to the water from this bridge, and that's because of the delta between the high tide and the low tide. We can't connect right down to it. So I think there'd be very minimal connection on the bridge to the water, but I think it's quite easy to actually imagine a language of the barrier on the sides folding and bending and actually allowing that to become something seating and so on. I think that can actually be part of the story of this without detracting from the sort of sculptural, poetic nature of the project.
And will it be built? I mean, it's an ongoing project?
Well, we hope so. It's about, as I said, 12 months ago we were contacted. 2 months ago, the Tamil Nadu government gave the green light for the funding of the project. It does work in sort of a slower bureaucratic sense there, it seems to us. And this is our first project in India, so we don't have a lot of experience in terms of the process in India. We've got a local structural partner in New Zealand and another structural partner in India on the project, so we hope it will be built.
Great. Well, thank you very much.